Hey everybody, welcome back to Living Traditions Homestead. Well, for 4 years now, we have had almost a completely weed-free garden. And we've been telling you guys about this amazing way that we garden for the last several years. And today we want to get a little bit more into the specifics of it, because we know that there's a lot of you who haven't been watching us for the last 4 years, and you may have some questions about exactly how this amazing woven ground cover works in our garden.
So we have been gardening in some way, shape, or form for the last 15 years, but we have gotten very serious about it over the past 10 years, and now we're at the point where we're growing and raising a majority of our own food here on our homestead and our farm in Southwest Missouri.
Now, during those 15 years, we have tried a lot of different ways of gardening. When we first started gardening, when our daughters were real little, we just had a small raised bed garden. We thought, hey, it would be great to just do a little bit of gardening to teach the kids how to grow some plants. Sarah and I both grew up with families that gardened on, at least a small scale. And we thought, hey, this is what we should do. We should be teaching our kids about a small amount of gardening. We then, over time, made that into a couple more raised bed gardens.
When we really started getting serious about growing our own food, we bought an urban farm in the Phoenix, Arizona area. That's when our gardens started getting pretty big. We started growing in the ground, and that's really when we started struggling with weeds. Now, in the Phoenix, Arizona area, we were able to implement the Back to Eden gardening style, and it worked so well for us there. We barely had any weeds, and all of the good things about Back to Eden gardening were happening in that garden. So when we decided to make the big move from Arizona to southern Missouri, we thought we had the whole weeds in the garden thing completely figured out, but we were completely wrong here in southern Missouri.
So the first year that we were here in Missouri setting up our homestead, we started to get our garden area ready. So we actually found the perfect location, actually the location we're in right now. We actually talked to a neighbor, and he let us know this is where the original owner of this property always had a garden. So we thought, great, this is the perfect spot, because he spent the last 50 years picking all the rocks out of the ground. We might as well take advantage of his hard work. So we decided that we were going to do a no-till method of gardening, because that's what we did in Arizona that worked so well. So the first year we were here, we scalped the ground. We put down all of the cardboard from every moving box that we had. We covered this entire area behind us with cardboard, and then we layered it with mulch and manure. And we did everything exactly the way you're supposed to do with Back to Eden gardening to get a new garden set up.
And you guys, we were really cocky. We really thought we had this figured out. And the first growing season, we got to about June, and we could keep up with the weeds, and we thought, man, we have this just figured out. But then July came, and August, and the weeds kept multiplying, and they kept getting bigger and bigger, to the point where there was no way for us to keep up with them. And in some cases, the weeds were taller than the vegetable plants.
Right. That's what set us originally on a path to look for a different way of gardening, because we knew that just wasn't going to be an option when already that first year the weeds were and they weren't growing on top of the mulch and things. They were growing up from the ground to underneath. Even though we had a good layer of mulch, things were just growing up. And now, because we had all of this mulch done, there wasn't a whole lot we could do other than try to pull them all back out. We couldn't mow them down because of the mulch, and we couldn't till them in because we can't till all of that mulch into our soil. So that led us to finding where we are today.
We just so happened to be about 40 minutes from the Baker Creek Heirloom Seed Company, and we had taken a couple trips out there to look at their gorgeous gardens and to look at seeds, buy seeds. And there was a way that they were gardening that was really peculiar to us, and we started paying attention to how few weeds they had and just what gorgeous gardens. We looked closer, and we found a woven weed fabric that they had laid down on the ground, and they were growing their plants through holes that they had put in this woven weed fabric. It was amazing, and we needed to learn more, because it looked like they were spending virtually no time picking weeds, all of their time growing, harvesting vegetables and seeds, and we wanted to do what they were doing.
When we originally saw what they were doing, we assumed that this was something only for big commercial growers, because they grow on a big scale, much bigger than what we do, or much bigger probably than what most of you do. So we didn't know if this was an option even for home gardeners, because when we went on YouTube and things to try to find videos, we saw people using it in greenhouses, and we saw people, landscaping companies and things like that, but nobody really using it in just a home garden. Right around that same time, we were also looking for our first greenhouse. Well, it just so happens the company that I stumbled upon for greenhouses, which is growersolution.com, just happened to also sell this woven ground cover. So we were able to get our hands on some. We didn't decide to use it inside of the greenhouse. We decided to use it outside, and that's where we are today, teaching you guys about how to use it, because it has really just been a game changer when it comes to gardening.
So today we want to spend just a few minutes talking with you guys about this woven weave fabric, the specifics, and to really answer some of the common questions that we get about it, so that you guys have all the information that you need to make a decision about whether or not this would be good for you.
So let's head into the garden and get started. So the first question that we get a lot about this ground cover is, what's the difference between this ground cover and just using, like solid black plastic or a tarp? And the real answer is that this is not solid plastic. This is a woven ground cover, which means it is a porous material. So it will allow water and air and everything else to go through it, and it won't heat the ground up underneath. If you were using solid plastic of some kind, either a tarp or like the stuff you can buy when you're painting, that would actually trap heat and moisture underneath. It would probably cause mold. It would cause just a ton of problems. This allows for the exchange of water and air and everything else, just like a natural mulch would do. And that's what makes it so great, is that it doesn't heat the soil up like a solid plastic tarp or piece of plastic would do.
So how do we actually use this woven weave fabric? How do we plant using this, and how do we grow our plants? Well, we primarily burn holes in a line in this fabric. You can see that there are some really awesome lines already in the fabric, so you can line up your rows, and whatever the spacing is that you're going to be planting your plant, you'll just burn holes into the woven weave fabric. We use a butane torch. You can either find it on Amazon or in the plumbing section at a hardware store, or even at Walmart. And wherever you want a plant, a seed, or wherever you're going to dig a hole and put your transplant or your small plant, that's what you do. There's a second way that you can use this woven weave fabric, especially if you're going to be doing root crops like carrots or something that's normally planted really close together and you don't want to burn a hole like every 2 inches. We completely understand that. The best way to do that is to use your sheets of woven weave fabric and butt them up close to each other, like 1 inch or 2 apart, and then plant your row like that. That method will require a lot more weeding than this method where you just burn a little hole in there, but that's the best way that we've found to use this woven weave fabric with things like carrots. By burning the smallest hole possible that you can for your plants really helps you keeps the weeds down. There's a point in there in the first, couple of weeks when your plants are really small that enough sunlight will get on the dirt that there's a possibility that a weed or two will come up before your plants shade it out when they become big. So really there's only a few weeks out of your entire growing season that you'll have to do much weeding at all. Otherwise, I'm telling you, you can have a virtually weed-free garden this year.
The next question that we get a lot about using the woven ground cover is about crop rotation, because you don't always want to plant your tomatoes in the same spot every year, your peppers in the same spot every year. You want to be able to rotate your crops. And the question is usually something like this when we're talking to people. Well, I always plant my tomato plants 18 inches apart, but I plant my pepper plants 24 inches apart. And my grandma taught me that I should always plant my cucumbers 14.5 inches apart, and I should always, plant my green beans 4 inches apart. How are we going to deal with all of that? Well, the bottom line is you're going to have to make some decisions. There's really 2 ways that you can combat this problem. I'll tell you first what we've done, and then I'll tell you kind of an alternative method as well. What we've done is really we've come up with some universal spacing in our garden. So for tomatoes, for example, when you look at a seed packet, say to plant them 18 to 24 inches apart. Cucumbers generally say to plant them 18 inches apart. Squash say 18 to 36 inches apart. So what we've done is we've kind of taken the common denominator and we plant almost everything in our garden 18 inches apart. Except for beans. Beans we just plant every 6 inches, and the holes that we put in for beans will always be for beans. Now, this leaves us with two options. We can either leave the ground cover down at the end of the year and just the next year, plant a pepper where this tomato is this year, and that's how we can rotate our crops. Or what we choose to do is that we actually pull the ground cover up every fall so that we can amend the soil, get it ready for the next year, and then put it back down, and we can actually just move the pieces of fabric to a new part of the garden. But either way, it doesn't really matter because our spacing is consistent throughout the garden. And you just really need to make some of those decisions when you start with this stuff, because you want to be able to use it year after year. This stuff is rated to last a long time, and you want to be able to use it year after year with as much universal use as you can.
Now, Kevin basically just answered two other questions that we get a lot, but I just wanted to specify the questions and the answers to just make sure everybody's clear. One of the questions is, do we throw this away after every year, or is it good for longer than one growing season? The good news is this woven weed fabric is rated for up to 10 years, and there are pieces that we're still using in some areas of the homestead that are on year 4, and they're still doing fantastic. The other question is, do you have to pull this up at the end of the growing season every year and then put it back down every spring? We actually do pull it up every year, not necessarily in the fall because a lot of times we're too exhausted, but we do pull it up every year so that we can amend the soil and then we put it back down. But really, you wouldn't have to do that. If you've got great soil and you don't feel like you need to amend it every year, if you do it every other year, then leave it there for more than one growing season. It will be fine.
The next question that we get a lot is about snakes and fire ants underneath the weed fabric. Now, let's start with fire ants. We don't have fire ants here in southern Missouri, luckily. We did when we lived in Arizona, but I'll tell you, we didn't use the ground cover there, so I don't have any experience with that. We don't have any of the ants that we get here in Missouri don't really like to go underneath the weed fabric. We've had no problem with them at all. Now, I do know our friends Danny and Wanda at Deep South Homestead, who live in Mississippi, have fire ants, and they have had fire ants underneath the weed fabric. As far as I know, they still think the benefits outweigh any possibility of fire ants being underneath there, and they continue to use it. But you might want to go check out their channel and see exactly how they're using it. If you live in a climate similar to theirs that has fire ants, because I think they have some videos talking about that specifically. Now, as far as snakes go, here in southern Missouri, we have a lot of snakes. We have huge black snakes, we have rattlesnakes, copperheads, little bitty snakes. We have all different kinds of snakes. They're just a pretty common thing to find in the summer, but we've never had a snake underneath our woven ground cover. I've often thought when we're pulling it up in the fall that we may find some. We've never seen one. I think it's partially because there's not really much under there for them. You know, snakes are usually out looking for frogs or bugs or mice or something like that. And we just don't have those things get underneath the weed fabric. So I don't think there's a lot there to attract the snakes to them. So we've never had a snake get underneath the weed fabric, and that is just fine with us. Now, along the same lines, something that we've discovered that we didn't really think about when we started using this, but has been a really happy benefit to this is in regards to ticks. We have a lot of ticks here in southern Missouri as well, probably even more than we have snakes. When we did Back to Eden gardening the first year that we were here and we put down all of the mulch, when we would come out to work in the garden, we would get back in and it wouldn't be uncommon to find 20 or 30 ticks crawling on you, which, I mean, is just about like it is when you walk in the woods around here. We just have a lot of ticks. Since we've been using the woven ground cover, we don't get any ticks on us at all when we're working in the garden. In fact, most of the time when Sarah's out here working, she's barefoot and she just loves it because it's so clean and it gives a way to be able to be out here without getting covered in all of those ticks and everything else that would normally like to live in that ground cover.
Another big question that we get about using this woven weed fabric is, how do we water? And really, there's no magic answer to that question. You can just water however you normally water your garden. If you live in an area that just has a bunch of rain, then just let the rain take care of it. If you never have to water with a sprinkler or whatever, and your garden gets enough water, just let that happen. The rain will soak right through this woven weed fabric perfectly and will just do a good job watering your garden. Now, we prefer to use drip tape irrigation. There are times in our summer that we won't have any rain at all for weeks and weeks, so we do need to rely on some kind of watering system. Drip tape works best for us, but you know what? If you like to use a watering wand and a hose, or if you just like to use a watering can, however you like to water or irrigate your garden, it will work with this woven weed fabric.
Well, we hope this gives you guys some hope that there is a way to have a weed-free garden, because like many of you, we struggled for years, and you know, life gets busy, and if only everything grew as good as those darn weeds do, life would be great. But we all know that the weeds grow twice as fast as everything else.
Well, you guys, we sure enjoyed having you here with us today while we talked about this awesome woven weed fabric. If you're enjoying our videos, make sure that you hit the subscribe button below. And also, if you'd give this video a thumbs up, we would really appreciate it. And, you know, the best way that you can help us here on the Homestead is just to share our videos on your social media. We would appreciate it. Until next time, thank you so much for stopping by our homestead. Take care, and God bless.
God bless.